everyone, welcome to the Blythe Starlight channel. My name is Therese Tucker and this is What in the World event readings. And this week I have a question from my friend Rodney. I'm going to read his statement and then we'll get into his question. So he says, I really enjoy Christopher Nolan films and part of me really wants to see Oppenheimer, upcoming film about the guy that helped develop the A-bomb. And part of me is wondering, do I want to spend 3 hours of my day towards thoughts of war and destruction? I don't consent to more bombs being created or dropped. And as I'm saying this, I'm feeling like now is not the time to see the movie. And then his question is, what might be a healthy transition to less violent entertainment? So this is a great question to ask. And I want to start by asking if we are watching movies about things like war, are we still helping promote that agenda? So let's start with that. Even though that's not really his question, I think he's kind of felt into how he feels about that. But I just want to check in and see if that's still a thing. Because in the past, it definitely has been. A lot of times, movies, television, music, etc., all these media are used to influence our thinking and help create something that is wanted. So let's find out if that's still the case, or are we aware enough now that we can watch these things and not be giving energy to its creation? That's kind of something I'd like to know. So let's check that out. My question is, if we're awake and aware that media is being used to help us create something that is wanted, are we able to watch these films and movies and also not contribute to the creation of an agenda? All right, so I got my answer. We got the moon in the upright position. Now, the moon is one of two cards in the major arcana. When they're in the upright position, it has to do with its negative implications, and when it's reversed, it's positive. So in the upright position, it's talking about being deceived or deception or something false happening. And what I'm getting from my team about it is that, yes, even if you're awake and aware, what you put your attention on grows. And that makes sense, right? So the saying goes, where attention goes, energy grows. So even if you are watching something with the awareness that this might be planted as an agenda to get me to give consent and I do not consent, but you're paying attention to it, you're actually helping it grow. So Rodney, you were right. It's probably not the best way to spend your energy, even though it might be a film that interests you. Now, I don't think that we're completely locked in once we watch it, but if it is like a 3-hour film, let's say, that is quite a bit of time to be focusing our attention in one direction. And if you think about it, during the day, most of us are not hyper focusing in on one thing for long periods of time. Most of us we do a little something, we get up, we take a break, we do something else, then we come back to it, right? It's not a stream of attention unless we're watching a movie or a play or a television show or, God forbid, an entire series, which, yes, I'm guilty of too. So it's just interesting, right? Because if it weren't for screens, do you think you could give that level of focus to something that wasn't a creative endeavor? So for the creatives out there, I'm hearing like, yeah, I could sit and write music for 5 hours, or I could work on a painting all day, and I do get that. But in general, if it's not producing that creative energy out of you, could you sit and focus your attention only on one thing for that long period of time? And maybe you can, and that's fantastic, but I think most of us have sort of a limit, and then we need to kind of decompress and do something else and then come back to it. That's my take. So the answer again is that even if you're awake and aware and you know there's agendas and things, and it's coming out current too, that I want to speak to that, it's coming out current, then yeah, you could be helping to push something through. Because what we don't know, but there's theories about, right? So we could go down rabbit holes, but what we don't know is, are they also putting subliminal stuff into these films and movies? And the truth is, we don't know. I've heard yes, but I don't know if it's always the case. But nevertheless, especially when you're in a movie theater, right? You're in a darkened space, kind of in that trance place. You have this bigger than life picture in front of you, and all of your attention is being focused there. That's a very different energy than sitting at home and watching it, right? Because the screen is smaller, you're in your own space, you can pause and talk, and you're breaking focus all the time. You pause to use the bathroom, you pause to go get more water or something. So you're kind of breaking the hypnotic state. When you're in the theater, it's like there, right? So there is a difference in that. Now I want to address the question Rodney had, like, what is a better way to spend this energy? And before I ask the team, here's how I've been dealing with it, knowing that the propaganda or the messaging that is put into film, television, music is usually geared towards the current time period, right? It's resonant and specific to the time period, whatever agendas are going on. So what I've been doing is I've been going retro, right? I've been going back in time and watching things like from the 90s and shows like that, where it's like that time period, the messaging is no longer really resonant, and so it's almost like I'm watching history versus absorbing it and getting ideas or opinions based on what's currently happening now. So that's one of the ways I've been kind of working around it. But we also want to look at why is violence such a popular topic. And I remember when I was in acting class back in New York, and I asked one of my teachers, the late Sam Christensen. He was an amazing person, but I had asked him why horror movies were so popular, because for me, I've always found the horror genre really upsetting and also very unnecessary. I feel like it just gives bad ideas to people who would take it and sort of run with it. So I don't understand why it was such a popular genre. And I remember his reply to me was that people loved being thrilled, right? They want the thrill, the adrenaline rush, and the excitement. And I never found that to be a satisfactory answer, although I'm sure that is very true. But it also does help that it helps the energy of violence grow when you're focusing on it, even if you're like, oh my God, this is so scary, how could that ever happen? The focusing on it, what it's doing, right, is it's actually lighting up a whole bunch of dopamine receptors in the brain. And you'll notice that the genre of horror, and not that he was speaking to the horror genre, Rodney, the questioner, he's not necessarily speaking to that, but just noticing the genre of horror, because it's one of the most extreme, right? You'll notice that in the beginning, like we look back now at the beginnings of horror, and it was maybe gross, but it seems mild, right? It wasn't as titillating, and then the bar just keeps raising. And that has to do with the fact that dopamine receptors, when you flood it with that much energy, right? When you're getting a thrill, when you're releasing a bunch of adrenaline like that, that's almost like blowing light bulbs. It's like, imagine these light bulbs popping in your head, and that's like your dopamine receptors blowing out. So the next time you were to see those images, you wouldn't have the same reaction effect. You still might be like, oh, that's gross, but part of you is, I know it's coming, and I've accepted it, and I know what to expect. And so those dopamine receptors don't fire, but also they're blown out. So what do you need the next time you watch a horror movie, right? If you're just watching The Creature from the Black Lagoon in the 1950s, that's not going to do it for you. No dopamine receptor is going to go off. So in order to get that effect, you're going to need to up the ante, to move it to an area where your adrenaline spikes again, the fear comes out, and the dopamine receptors blow out and create that experience for you of getting a thrill. And so, unfortunately, with that energy, it just keeps staggering upward and upward, and the energy it produces is a very dark energy. And it's the same with violence in movies, right? The it's that same component. So even though horror is the extreme version of the dopamine blowout experience, violence does the same thing. It's like you'll notice that there is what they show us in violent movies continues to become more and more violent, and we in turn watching that become more and more desensitized to it, to the point where we can start seeing it in real life and not have that same sense of danger, sense of fear, a reaction to it. It's almost like we're numb to it, which is one of the points. And so part of, as we're evolving and looking at this and taking responsibility for our part, and again, you're not saying make these movies and make them gory and make them super violent. It's not like you're directly demanding it. But every time we support it by going to watch it, paying money for it, renting it, things like that, we are implying consent. Even if you watch the movie and go, oh my God, I don't consent to that. That should never happen. There is implied consent in the cooperation of it. And so we're at this weird point when we become aware of that we now have to decide if it's ethically in alignment with us to continue supporting a movie or a genre that displays horror or violence or things like that, especially if you're like, I would never consent to that in real life. Then why are we allowing ourselves to imagine it? And that's a great question to ask, and it shows when you're asking those kinds of questions that you're playing on that higher game board that I was talking about in another clip here. I was talking about that on the timelines video that you're going to see on this channel. It's either coming before this video or right after. But I'll talk about that higher game board. That comes from the law of one. And on the higher game board, the idea is to get into integrity, alignment with your own morals and ethics. That's the game, the spiritual game that propels your soul forward on your own spiritual journey. So these are great questions to ask ourselves. Now, let's ask the team what they would suggest. And again, remember, it's a suggestion. I can't tell you what's right or wrong. That is up to you and what's in alignment with your soul. I can only suggest what would be maybe the path of ease or grace forward. So let's find out what my team has to say about that. So here's what they have to say. I love this. They're talking about you should seek entertainment that uplifts and inspires your soul. What helps you understand yourself or others at a deeper level, and what inspires you. Like, what makes you feel lifted up and more capable after experiencing that. And again, that's only something that you can truly answer. This isn't something that I can't tell you, oh, hey, go watch this movie. Because even if that movie uplifts and inspires me, it's not necessarily, right? It's not necessarily going to be your cup of tea either. But that's what we're looking for in this time. We are rising up out of a very dense, heavy period that we can see the remnants of it everywhere, the heaviness and the darkness. But we're rising up and out. But it requires from us more due diligence than we had before. So when we were sort of unaware, blissfully unaware of the situation we were in, it was easy to go to these movies and it was easy to enjoy the action flick and the fighting and maybe the horror if that was your thing. It was easy to do it, but the more aware you become of the negative energy structures that we're trying to disassemble and the direction you desire to head, there is a type of spiritual sacrifice that happens where you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Like Rodney was asking, to immerse yourself in an energy that you don't consent to or feel aligned to. And if you ask yourself those questions, you'll get some great answers. And your soul will guide you to what you'd rather focus in on. And sometimes it might mean just walking away from it all and going out in nature, going for a walk, sitting and listening to music, reading a book, realizing that, you know, in our lives, increasingly, we've got screens. I'm talking to a screen right now, right? So I'm not one to talk. I'm right in the middle of it with you. But we're inundated with this. It's everywhere. And really, it's one of the things that has caused the most harm. As helpful as they are, it's also been a double-edged sword where it helps in one way and then it harms in a different way. So perhaps the answer is to seek another form of entertainment. Like, one of my favorite things is just hanging out and watching my kids play with the cat, and that's been quite entertaining. Kids and animals, very entertaining. So hopefully this message was helpful. If you have a question about things that are going on in the world, or ascension, or how to move forward in more soul alignment, you want to ask a question, drop it here in the comments. Let me know and share your thoughts. What do you think? Do you think that watching films and TV about negative events has any impact on us, or are we reading more into it than is necessary? I'd love to hear your comments. Drop them below, and subscribe, like, and share this video if it helped you. Sending you so much love, and I'll talk to you soon. Mwah.